Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and this video is the last review of Classics Review Week. Yeah! Neutral Milk Hotel in the Aeroplane Over the Sea. Originally, I was not planning to review this album. I even kind of made a video about how I wasn't planning to review this album and why. I was talking about the virally infectious and sometimes ridiculous cult status that this album has. I asked you guys what you thought about it, and you let me know. And some of you made some really convincing arguments, talking about how the people who are making a mockery of this LP are in the minority. And if that's all I address, I sort of let them win. I'm sort of making a mountain out of the molehill of jokes that there are around the internet in regards to this album. And not making a video where I kind of focus away from those things hurts this album more than it helps it. Plus, the thing is, reviewing this album really isn't that big of a deal. An album is really only as important as you make it out to be. So, Neutral Milk Hotel was an experimental indie and folk rock band from Ruston, Louisiana. They only came out with a couple albums in their very short discography, and the second that they dropped just so happens to be one of the most celebrated releases in underground music. Released back in 1998, people still go nuts for this album, and it just has this staying power that not a lot of releases see. But for me, it's not hard to understand why. I think this album has a lot of great qualities going for it. This thing has a really bold sound built out of inspiration from noise rock, from psychedelic rock, and folk music, hailing from Scotland, Eastern Europe, and America. Plus, there is a heavy influence coming from the 90s lo-fi rock scene, contemporaries like Guided by Voices and Sebadoh. So this album definitely has a lot of influences going for it. But on top of that, it's extremely well arranged, colorfully arranged, with singing saws and horns and accordion, keyboards, bagpipes as well. And plus the usual suspects are here: acoustic guitar, warm, heavy, distorted, overblown bass, and some really hard-hitting drums too. With all these different sounds and textures, In the Aeroplane Over the Sea perfectly complements heaviness and noise and aggression with tenderness and beauty. It's a style the project really built up to, with a handful of demos and a debut album on Avery Island. Avery is not the preferred album, but it shares a lot of elements within the Aeroplane. A lot of the songs on here have similar chord progressions, a very lo-fi and overblown sound, influences from folk music, psychedelic rock music, and very surreal lyricism too. All it was really missing was this just cohesive theme. When I listen to In the Aeroplane Over the Sea as opposed to Avery Island, I feel like I'm really partaking in a story. Plus, In the Aeroplane just had this grand jubilee of horns and just all this extra instrumentation to really kind of bring it to a next level. Plus, In the Aeroplane really has a daunting sadness that just is hard to deny. And it's hard to deny because it just does not let up. Almost every song on this LP looks for a different way to advance that feeling. What's so funny is that sometimes I don't even know why this album gets me so emotional. And I guess I say I don't know why because it's not like I really get a clear and totally comprehensible story out of any one of these songs. Of course, people have read interviews that talk about what has inspired these lyrics, but what inspired these lyrics and what these lyrics actually are two different things. I just prefer to take the lyrics as they are. The less you know, the more disturbing they kind of become. The imagery is so vivid, and yet when I actually try to imagine what Jeff Mangum is singing about on these tracks, it's like my brain has this malfunction. It's like, does not compute. I mean, how exactly does one picture a little boy in Spain playing pianos filled with flames? It doesn't look like that. No. The lyrics are really where this album hits hardest for me. I think everything else on this LP is great, but it wouldn't add up to as much as it does if it wasn't for Jeff Mangum using his lyricism to build from scratch this really surreal world of two-headed boys, ghosts, tomatoes, and radio wire. The abstract imagery on this thing is so out there sometimes, it rivals the fantasy world created in the book Alice in Wonderland. The stories sometimes just feel so nonsensical, but for me, they have such a huge emotional impact anyway, with all these themes of death, and God, and love, and genocide, and war, and saving somebody's life, and intimacy, and family. And all these stories are delivered in Jeff Mangum's kind of nasally voice. It's weird. It's like there's no stomach in his voice whatsoever. It's like it's all up here. And on a good chunk of this album, he's like kind of straining his voice, partially out of trying to reach the higher points of his register, and partially because he's just forcing himself to sing so hard and so loud. The dude must have a massive lung capacity, because if you actually try to sing along with this album, you'll see it's pretty difficult sometimes. It's like the dude will go a whole verse without taking a breath. I know there are some people out there who don't like Jeff's voice and are not going to like Jeff's voice, but I enjoy it. I think it has a unique tone to it, and he's on pitch for the most part, and he just showcases a lot of personality and a lot of passion. Another critique this album often gets is it's simple. Simple chords, simple songs, simple melodies. It's really simple. But you know, I think that's kind of an odd point. An album being bad because it's simple? I mean, this thing is pretty folky. It's not exactly looking to be technical, overly progressive, or anything like that. But I do see the complaint. You know, if you've been playing guitar consistently for a year, you can most likely play every single song on this album if you were handed the chords. But I think the simplicity issue is a little overblown. I mean, take for example the way The King of Carrot Flowers Part 2 builds up so noisily and so heavily into Part 3, or the way the song Ghost escalates towards its finish line. Not every album and band can do that stuff. The greatness of these songs doesn't come out in their blueprint of the chords and the melodies written out on a piece of sheet music. The greatness comes out in their performance. Take the title track, for example. The chords over the verses in the title track are the same exact chords to that famous doo-wop song, Earth Angel. In fact, they're the same exact chords to that little ditty that you hear at the end of every single one of my reviews. Same chords. Same chords. However, Neutral Milk Hotel's take on these chords doesn't sound anything like those two other songs. It's layered to be really kind of noisy and sweet with these singing saws and a nice trumpet solo, lots of fuzzy acoustic guitar strumming, and I love the melody that Jeff is belting out with his voice too. All of these elements just make me feel so happy and kind of uplifted, despite the fact that some of the lyrics are kind of morbid. Every track on this album does bring a little bit of a different feeling for me though, even though the total package to me is kind of sad, personally. The King of Carrot Flowers Parts 2 and 3, the way the song just busts into this high-speed, distorted bass and drum part, it's really thrilling. It's like riding a bicycle down a really steep hill at 50 miles an hour and you've got no brakes. The song Two-Headed Boy, even though it's really acoustic and stripped down, there's not a lot to it, it sounds so urgent and just fiery. The song The Fool is a great instrumental. It's just really lumbering. It's just really depressing. It's got this Balkan brass kind of feel to its style. It's like a funeral march. And the song O Comely later on that album makes that feeling just even heavier. And all of these different emotional and sonic highs and lows just flow together so nicely. The King of Carrot Flowers Part 1 is a fantastic opener. It's kind of like opening up a book. It's like the Call Me Ishmael of indie music. And the transition into parts 2 and 3 just starts with this really kind of ominous drone. It's almost as if I'm listening to a string section in a pit orchestra just lay on this constant note, building up to something really epic. The heavily arranged and instrumental Fool is a great partner to the stripped down and simple Two-Headed Boy. The loud and furious Holland 1945 is put up right against the slow and soundscapey Communist Daughter. And the track Ghost just kind of breaks into this great untitled instrumental bit that's just like a musical explosion of bagpipes and heavy drum beats and bass. And the song Two-Headed Boy Part 2, it's just like the perfect closer. It's the last page complementing the first page that was King of Carrot Flowers Part 1. There's just a lot of tension and release on this album, a lot of hot and cold, highs and lows. This thing is always taking a different turn with its next track. There's not much else I can think to say about this album. It's just fantastic. It's cohesive, there's a lot of different flavors on here as well. Thematic, anthemic, memorable, surreal, and ambitious. And it brings a range of different feelings out of me. It just excites me, it depresses me, it inspires me, and soothes me, all in one 40-minute listen. I think it's a great album. I'm going to continue loving the hell out of it for the foreseeable future. And, you know, keep in mind, I'm not saying you have to like it. I'm not saying you have to think it's amazing. I'm not saying you have to buy into the hype. I think this album has its flaws, sure. If you like your songs to be more straightforward, more readable, less kind of abstract, I could understand that. If you like your music to be a little more complicated, a little more progressive, I can understand that. But what's important is that if you haven't heard this album, take a listen to it and form your own opinion. What does this album mean to you? How does it make you feel? Let me know. Anthony Fantano, Neutral Milk Hotel, in the Aeroplane Over the Sea, forever.